My name is Tim Barley, and I love families. About the past 20 years, I've been working with moms and dads and teens, just trying to help them understand how to navigate through this amazing adventure we call the teenage years, and equip them with ideas and thoughts about how to talk to one another and how to tackle tough issues and how to celebrate life together.
So today we're going to be talking about the idea of the over-sexualization of teens in America. And that's a very debatable question depending on who you're talking to. And so what I'd like to do today is share a lot of information that I've come across with as I've spoken in public and private school classrooms, just asking high school students questions about the idea of sex and what's happening with sexual activity among their peers, and just things that they understand and don't understand, and questions and responses to all the different influences that they're exposed to on a regular basis. So a lot of what we'll be talking about today is going to be based on that and what I've been able to gather from the classroom presentations. First of all, when we talk about this idea of sexualization or over-sexualization, it's important that we're all on the same page and understand what we're referring to. This idea of sexualization has to do with an individual's sense of their value or worth based on their sex appeal, based on how other people are perceiving them in regard to this kind of narrow assessment of how do I look, what do I make people think about me sexually, am I desirable, all those kinds of things. And when we project that onto teenagers and children, it can become quite complex and quite potentially damaging, and again, that's what we want you as parents to understand, how to identify it, how to address it, and hopefully how to help your kids walk through the tricky place that we are in our culture. And one of the questions that I often ask in the classroom setting is just to kind of give me a feel for what's happening in your campus culture, what's happening sexually among students, and I always give them the kind of boundaries of saying this isn't about you, so don't feel like I'm perceiving what you're saying based on what you say or how you identify an answer to this question. I just want to get a feel for what's happening on your culture. And so I like to start off by saying, how many of you know someone who has already made a decision to be sexually active? But before you answer that question, I always am very clear to make sure they understand this. Let's define what sexual activity is. Because really that definition has changed a lot in the minds of the culture. At one point in time when someone said so-and-so is having sex with someone, most of us would assume that we're talking about sexual intercourse. But now the idea is sex can occur in much more ways. And it is occurring in much different ways than just intercourse. So we define sexual activity for them, and so we say sexual activity occurs whenever there is skin-to-skin contact between two people involving the genital region of the body. And I make sure they all understand what we're talking about and kind of walk them through that, and we're all on the same page. And then I say, now, based on that definition, how many of you know students within this school community that are involved in some form of sexual activity? And on average, 99% of the students' hands go up. Usually it's 100%. Every now and then there's one or two students that don't raise their hand, but usually that's the number of hands that go up. And we're talking about freshman health classes primarily. Those are the classes that we go into. So the vast majority of the students are saying, yeah, absolutely, there are students who are involved in some form of sexual activity. I always like to ask them also, so how many of you know someone who's made a sexual choice and that sexual choice has turned out to be something that they regretted? Usually we have over half the students, well over half the students that respond that's been the case. And so we take all that and we kind of use that as the basis for what we talk about throughout the class discussion on sex and the sexualization of our culture, the over-sexualization of teen culture. It's very interesting because I'll do this illustration where I'll say, ask them if they know what a balance scale is. And I'll say, okay, let's say on one side of the balance scale, we've got sexual activity between two people who are in a committed dating relationship, say. And then on the other side of the balance scale, we've got sexual activity between two people who are not in a committed dating relationship. Maybe they met at a party, maybe they hooked up through some social media, whatever it may be, but they're definitely not committed to one another. And then I'll ask these students, I'll say, so when you compare the two, sex between two people who are in a committed dating relationship and sex between two people who are not, which type of sexual activity occurs more frequently among the students in your high school community? And every time, every school, every classroom, they always say the same thing. There's more sexual activity occurring between people who are in uncommitted relationships, or not even relationships, who are engaged in sexual activity and they're not committed to one another. And so I say, okay, that's consistent with what we're hearing, from other campuses. Why would you think that is? And then they start to give me some of the reasons, why the current climate of sexual activity is the rage, I guess, in our culture. And so they'll tell me that there's all kinds of influences that they have in their lives. And so we'll kind of go down the list. So they've got the influence of home and family. Maybe some of them have the influence of church, the influence of school, the influence of sports. But I'll say, well, what about the influences when it comes to making sexual choices? And by far the majority of them talk about a couple of things. Peer pressure is probably the top one. They'll talk about curiosity, wanting to have fun, just a sense of wanting to just be where everyone else is, that kind of thing. And then they'll talk about the pressure of the media, or more appropriately, the influence of the media. And so I get them to break down the idea of what are we talking about when we talk about media. And so they'll talk about forms of media like television. And I'll say, so let's look at that specifically. So are you telling me that there are sexual messages, sent, to you guys through the television? And they say, absolutely. And I'll ask them to give me examples, and they'll name shows, and they'll talk about, teen actors or actresses, on certain shows who either through the way they dress provocatively or the way that they speak very openly sexually, it kind of gives them a sense that that's what's normal. That's the norm and to be expected among teens. And then we'll go to movies, and they'll say the same thing. And I'll ask them, how many of you know of movies that kind of glorify the idea of teen sexual behavior? All their hands go up, and I say, well, give me some examples. And almost every student in the classroom will be able to shout out an example of either a current film or a film within the past decade or so that kind of glorifies this idea of teen sexuality. Then I ask them about what about music? Or often they'll offer these examples of the media without me even having to ask them. But I'll say, what about music? And they'll say, oh yeah. And I'm like, let me know, what are some artists or what are some songs that kind of communicate, the message of being sexually active now, not worrying about, commitment to somebody, or not worrying about, being careful necessarily. And so they'll shout out all kinds of artists, and all kinds of songs. And I ask them, do you have those downloaded on your iPods right now? They're like, yeah, of course. Those are right now. We listen to it on the way to school, and we listen to it on the way back from school. And I'm like, okay, I get it. That's definitely an influence. And then we'll talk about the internet, and social media, and the influences that can have just on their ideas about sex, and just kind of the thinking that it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. Why do some people try to make it a big deal? It's not. Whether you know the person, whether you don't know the person, whether you feel like you're ready or you don't feel like you're ready. Those are not big deals. You just got to jump in there, give it a try, do it. And these are all the messages that they are communicating to us in the classroom. They talk about merchandising. from the stores at the mall that they go to, where they'll walk in and they'll see mannequins, with thongs on, or they'll see another, ad with a guy who's got, no shirt and pants and a slogan that says, get into my pants. And so again, constantly they're being bombarded, by these messages, these influences to kind of put their guard down. So after we make this list of all the influences that are coming, at teens, after we ask them, like, what are some of the influences that are encouraging teens to choose sex now, to allow, themselves to get into sexual situations that they may or may not have planned to get into. It's very interesting, because I also think it's important for us to walk through students, to walk through this idea with teens of the other influences, the influences that are encouraging them to wait, or to stop, or to avoid, getting involved in some of these activities at this point in their lives. And I asked them, who are the influences, what are some of the voices in your world that are encouraging you not to go there sexually, but to hold off and wait? And so they'll make a list, and they'll include, mom, dad, always at the top of the list, by the way. Mom, dad, teachers, pastors, priests, coaches, administrators, older siblings, all those kinds of things. And then I'll say, okay, so help me understand, what is the motive behind those folks? What's the motive behind those folks? The motive behind the other side, the media, music, TV, books, magazines, all those kinds of things. What is their motive? What are they trying to get out of it? And they all know that it's about money. And I'll even ask them, I'll say, so if the media knew that the majority of teens, did not want to get involved in sexual activity until later in life, until they were more mature or in a committed relationship like marriage, do you think their message would change? And everyone says, of course, because it's not going to make them money if they do the other way. I'm like, that's a great point. But what about this other group? Parents and teachers and spiritual leaders and all those kind of folks. What is their motive? And they sit there for a minute before they acknowledge it, and they say, a few hands go up, and they say, because they love us. I'm like, say that again, please. Because they love us. I'm like, that's exactly right. These are the people who love you. These are the people who know you. These are the people who want what's best for you. These are the people who will stand by you even when you blow it, even when you mess up. So as parents, a few things I think are important for your kids to hear. First of all, yes, your love for them is unconditional. Even when they blow it, you're going to be there. However, there may be some consequences that they're going to have to deal with, consequences that they could avoid, consequences that maybe you need to understand how to explain to them, to walk through with them, and becoming more educated about what some of these consequences are is important. For example, just the influences that they're listening to. Be very aware of what your kids are plugged into. Music they're listening to, TV shows they're watching, movies that they're going out to see, those kinds of things. And those can provide great opportunities for you to kind of debrief them with your kids and say, hey, I heard you went and saw this movie, Tell me what you thought about that, And then maybe you can, if you haven't seen the movie yourself, maybe you can read the review. There's a lot of great parent-friendly websites that provide detailed information about some of the more controversial content that might be in the film. And so you can say, what did you think about this part of the movie where this happened? And again, use that as opportunity to kind of figure out where is your kid at in regard to like shaping their own values in their heads, and what have they decided about what they see as beneficial or unhealthy or unwise. Those are super important opportunities. Even the music that they're listening to, sometimes say, hey, I want to listen to some songs that you've got downloaded on your iPod. And maybe if you know in advance what some of the songs are, you can even listen to the lyrics, because you probably won't be able to understand a lot of them. You can print out the lyrics, from a website, and then say, yeah, I was listening to what one of these songs said about, love in the club. What is that really saying? That you're hooking up with somebody that you don't know on a dance floor, and is that what you're all about? Is that really what where your value system is right now? And again, use that as an opportunity to help your children realize either, no, that's not where I'm at, or I haven't really thought about it. And maybe that's a golden opportunity for you to say, man, you may not realize it, but those songs are communicating messages that you may be holding on to in ways that you're not fully aware of. And that someday they may come out as something that you act on, something that you think about, something that you share with others that you don't have any idea where it came from, and it may just be a TV show you watched, a song you listened to, a movie that you watched. So again, parents can be involved in that process with their kids and kind of walking through kind of an evaluation of some of these things and helping them to understand that all the messages that they're hearing and seeing aren't beneficial. A lot of your kids know that already, but for you to reinforce that can be a very positive opportunity for you. One of the topics we'll introduce is the topic that's not a very savory topic, but it's so important for us to talk about it, and that's just the topic of health. So we asked them, how many of you know about sexually transmitted diseases? And almost all the students raise their hand. And then I'll ask them this question. I'll say, according to the Center for Disease Control, do you know how many teenagers are infected, how many sexually active teenagers are infected with STDs every year? And they just kind of sit there for a minute, and they'll throw out some guesses. And I'll say, according to the Center for Disease Control, 1 out of every 4 sexually active teen will be infected with an STD every year. And that has gradually, that number has grown higher gradually over every decade since the statistics were gathered back in the 60s. And so we're seeing the highest number ever of teens being infected with STDs. Today, 1 out of every 4. Oh man, I'll beat the odds. There's no way that I'm going to get an STD. And then I'll go back to that beginning conversation that we had. And I said, now when I first came into the classroom, almost all of you, if not all of you, acknowledged that students who are on this campus who are sexually active. Now, if that's true, and the current statistics from the Center for Disease Control tell us that 1 out of every 4 teens is being infected with an STD every year, do you think there are students on your campus right now, at this very moment, who are infected with STDs? And very slowly you start to see heads nod, like, that's right, okay? And let me ask you this. Do you think there are students who are infected with STDs on your campus who don't know it? And then sure, I'm like, yeah, most STDs are what we call asymptomatic. And this is an important thing for you to talk to your children about. That means that you don't show symptoms. Things aren't like turning weird colors and falling off necessarily, okay? You may be infected with an STD and really you don't have symptoms for days, weeks, months, years, or even longer. That may be the way that it works. So just because you don't feel bad or look bad doesn't mean that you're not infected. And then I asked them this. I said, do you think that there may be students who are infected with STDs and know it, but aren't telling anybody about it? And then whoa, yeah. I'm like, who's going to go around saying, hey, guess what? I got syphilis. Who's going to do that? That's social suicide. No one's going to do that. So this question about the over-sexualization of American youth, man, it's a no-brainer. I mean, between all the influences, the media, the merchandising, the advertising, just the freedom of conversation that's having right now, which can be a wonderful thing if the conversation is being guided by some people who know both sides of the story, like moms and dads that are getting educated and equipped to understand, how to have conversations with their kids that might not just, protect their kids, might save their kids' lives, in ways that you may not even realize right now. So at Teen Esteem, we're all about, educating, equipping, and empowering students, but also parents, to just let them know that they've got a valuable voice in the life of their kids, and we hope that you learn how to use it effectively. Thank you.